The phone rang twice before he picked it up without looking at the screen. Yes, he said, sharp, tired. The voice of a man who had just finished a meeting that cost more money than most people saw in a lifetime. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice, warm and worn out, filled the line. You're late again, she said, half laughing, half sighing. The children already ate. I saved you rice, but if you come home and complain it's cold, I will feed it to the dog. Baek Sungmo froze. He did not have a dog. He did not have children. He did not, as far as he knew, have anyone in his life who spoke to him like that, like he was just a tired man coming home, and not the most feared name in 3 port cities. He should have said, wrong number. He almost did. His mouth even opened to say it. But something in her voice stopped him. It was soft in a way nothing in his life was soft. No fear in it, no performance, just tiredness, and love wrapped so naturally around the tiredness that he almost didn't notice it was there. Long day? He heard himself say instead. You have no idea, she said. Kemi wouldn't eat her vegetables, Dara broke a plate crying about a cartoon, and the baby, don't get me started on the baby. A tired laugh. I miss when you used to actually be home before 8, bio. Sungmo's chest did something strange. He was not bio, he had never been called bio in his life. Somewhere, on some ordinary street, in some ordinary house. A man named Bio was late coming home to a woman who saved him rice and threatened it to a dog that probably didn't exist either. He should hang up. Every rule in his life, every rule that had kept him alive through 2 assassination attempts and 1 very ugly boardroom war, told him to hang up right now. He didn't. Tell me about your day, he said instead. All of it. There was a small silence on the line, surprised, like she hadn't expected him to ask, or maybe hadn't expected him to actually want to know. Then, she started talking. And Baek Sungmo, the man 12 journalists had once called a shadow with a bank account, sat alone in the back of his car, in the dark, listening to a stranger's whole ordinary, tired, beautiful day, and found that he did not want it to end. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in an apartment with 3 sleeping children and 1 empty side of the bed that had been empty for 2 years, a woman named Adaize. No, wait. He didn't even know her name yet. That was the problem. He had just spent 11 minutes on the phone with a total stranger, and he never once asked who she was. And when he finally worked up the courage to ask, gently, carefully, like a man diffusing something he didn't understand, the line went quiet in a way that made his stomach drop. Bayo, she said slowly, her voice suddenly different. Careful, confused. Why are you asking me my own name? Sungmo's mind moved fast, the way it always did in dangerous moments, negotiations, threats, betrayals. He had talked his way out of gunpoint once. He could talk his way out of this. Bad connection, he said quickly. Static. Say it again. A pause. Then a small suspicious laugh. Bayo, are you drunk? No, he said, too fast. You sound strange. Long day, he said, borrowing her own words back at her, which, to his surprise, worked. She sighed the sigh of a woman who had decided a long time ago that some battles with her husband weren't worth fighting after 9 o'clock at night. Fine, she said. It's Ndidi. Your wife. The mother of your 3 children. Ring any bells, Bio? Or should I text you a photo? Ndidi. He repeated it silently in his head, like it belonged to him now, which was ridiculous. Because it belonged to a man named Bio, who Sungmo had never met and now desperately needed to identify. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it more than she could possibly know. Tell me about the kids again. I want to hear it properly this time. You're being weird tonight, Ndidi said. But she told him anyway about Kemi's vegetable strike, about Dara's crying over a cartoon dog that died in the first 5 minutes of a movie clearly not made for 7-year-olds, about the baby, who apparently had recently discovered that throwing spoons on the floor was the single funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. Sungmo found himself smiling. Actually smiling. alone in the back of a car that cost more than most apartments in Seoul, listening to a stranger describe a baby spoon throwing Olympics like it was the most important news of the century. He's got quite the arm, Sungmo said. He gets it from his father, Indidi said, who apparently forgot how to come home on time. There it is again. Bio. He needed to find out who this man was. Fast, before this went any further, before he said something that made this woman realize she was talking to a total stranger who ran half the shipping routes in and out of Busan. I have to go, he said finally, forcing the words out even though some strange, unfamiliar part of him didn't want to. Come home safe, Indidi said, soft again. The exhaustion in her voice folding into something gentler. The rice is getting cold, but I'll heat it up. Again, the line went dead. Sungmo sat in the dark car for a long moment, phone still in his hand, feeling something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. Not power, not fear, not the careful calculation that ran under every conversation of his life. Just warmth, ordinary, undeserved warmth, meant for another man entirely. He looked at the number on his screen. He had dialed it by accident. He was almost sure of that. He'd meant to call his driver, the man who'd been late picking him up tonight, the man whose number was saved 2 digits away from this one in his phone. His driver. Sungmo's stomach dropped. He scrolled to his contacts. There it was. Driver. Owusu Bio. 1 digit different from the number he'd just spent 11 minutes talking to. 1 single, catastrophic digit. He had just spent 11 minutes talking to his own driver's wife. And, she thought, he was her husband. Sungmo let out a short, disbelieving laugh. The kind of laugh that had absolutely no business coming out of a man like him, in the back of a car like this, after a day like today. He actually put a hand over his mouth like someone might hear him. This is insane, he thought. I run 3 companies and I just accidentally role-played as my own driver's husband for 11 minutes. He should call Bio. Right now. Tell him the truth, that his boss dialed the wrong number, that his wife had spent 11 minutes describing a baby spoon throwing habits to the most dangerous man in the shipping industry, and that this was, without question, the strangest and most humiliating accident of Sungmo's professional life. He picked up his phone to do exactly that. Then, he stopped. Because something about the whole thing didn't sit right. Something small, nagging, half-formed. Bio had been his driver for 3 years. Reliable, quiet, punctual to the point of being almost unsettling. In 3 years, Bio had never once mentioned a wife. Never once mentioned 3 children. One of them a baby with an Olympic-level throwing arm. Never once asked for time off for a sick kid, a school event, a wife's birthday, nothing. Not once. Sungmo frowned at his phone, the humor of the moment fading into something else, something with sharper edges. He thought about calling Bio to explain the mix-up. Instead, almost without deciding to, he saved the number under a new name. Unknown. Do not delete. He told himself it was because he needed evidence, in case this became a problem. He told himself it had nothing to do with the sound of her laugh, or the tired warmth in her voice, or the way she'd said come home safe like she still meant it. 2 years into a marriage that, for reasons Sungmo could not yet explain, his own driver had apparently never once talked about. His phone buzzed in his hand. A text. From Bio. Sorry for being late tonight, sir. Family emergency. Won't happen again. Sungmo stared at the message for a long moment, 3 words in it snagged in his mind and refused to let go. Family emergency. What family, he wondered, does a man have, when his own wife had just spent 11 minutes talking to a stranger about spoons and vegetables and cold rice, with absolutely no idea her husband wasn't the one listening? Sungmo did not sleep much that night. He told himself it was business, a shipment delay in Incheon, a contract dispute with a supplier in Qingdao. The usual noise that kept a man like him up past 3 in the morning. But somewhere around 2, lying in the dark with his phone on the pillow beside him like an idiot, he admitted the truth to himself. He was thinking about the rice going cold. By morning, He had made a decision that would have horrified every version of himself from every year before this one. He was going to accidentally call that number again. He waited 3 days. Long enough, he told himself, to seem normal. Not long enough, apparently, for his self-control to actually kick in. On the third night, in the back of the car again, he dialed the number. The real one this time, not by accident, though he still told himself it was, and pressed it to his ear like a man defusing a bomb. It rang twice. "You're early tonight," Ndidi said, and there was surprise in her voice and something warmer underneath the surprise. "Should I be worried? Did you win the lottery, Bio?" "Something like that," Sungmo said, and immediately regretted it. Because now he'd have to explain a lottery he hadn't won, to a wife he wasn't married to, on behalf of a husband he'd never actually met. This is a terrible idea, he thought. I am the CEO of a shipping empire, and I cannot even manage one fake conversation without complicating it in the first 10 seconds. "What numbers?" Ndidi asked. "I forget," Sungmo said quickly. "How was your day?" She let the lottery thing go, thankfully, mercifully, and launched into an update on baby Emeka's spoon career, Dara's ongoing grief over the cartoon dog, and Kemi's discovery that she could apparently negotiate her vegetables down to 3 peas. "No more, this is my final offer." Sungmo laughed out loud. A real laugh, the kind that surprised even him, echoing strangely in the back of a silent, expensive car. "Did you just laugh at me?" Ndidi said, delighted despite herself. "You never laugh at my stories anymore." Something in Sungmo's chest tightened at that. Anymore, like there had been a time when Bio did laugh, and something had changed. "I'm listening more carefully now," Sungmo said, which was, unsettlingly, the truest thing he'd said out loud in years. There was a pause on the line. A soft one. "You've been different lately," Ndidi said quietly. "Calling more. Asking more questions. I'm not complaining, She stopped. "Is everything okay? At work? You've been so quiet about it lately. You used to tell me everything about that place." Sungmo went very still. That place. Meaning, here. Meaning, his company. Meaning, the man he was pretending to be actually worked for him, and apparently used to come home and talk about it, before he stopped. "Work is complicated right now," Sungmo said carefully, which was true in more ways than Ndidi could possibly understand. "You'll figure it out," Ndidi said, with a certainty that hit him harder than it should have. "You always do. Whatever it is." A pause. Softer. "I trust you, Bio. Whatever's going on, I trust you." Sungmo closed his eyes. Somewhere, in some version of tonight that made sense, a man named Bio deserved that sentence. Sungmo did not. He was a stranger wearing another man's name like a coat that didn't fit, collecting warmth that belonged to someone else, and the guilt of it sat heavy and strange in his chest. Right alongside something he refused, for now, to call by its real name. "I have to go," he said again, the same exit he always used, because he didn't trust himself to stay on the line much longer without saying something he couldn't take back. "Okay," Ndidi said. Then, softer, "Thank you for listening tonight. Really listening. I needed that." The call ended. Sungmo sat in the dark, phone in his lap, and allowed himself exactly 30 seconds to feel something before he shut it down, and became, once again, the man 12 journalists had called a shadow with a bank account. 30 seconds was not enough. It never was, lately. The next morning, he called his head of internal affairs into his office. A quiet, efficient woman named Haewon who had a talent for finding things people didn't want found. "I need a background check," he said. "Discreet, on my driver." Haewon raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. It wasn't her job to ask questions, and she'd learned a long time ago that Sungmo's requests usually made sense eventually, even when they didn't at first. "Any particular reason, sir?" Sungmo thought about the cold rice, the spoon Olympics, the dog that didn't exist, and the grief that did. "I trust you, Bio, whatever's going on. Just do it quietly," he said. "And do it fast." Haewon nodded and left. 3 hours later, She was back in his office, a single folder in her hands, her face unusually careful, the expression of someone who had found something they weren't sure how to deliver. "Sir," she said slowly, "there's something strange in Owusu Bayo's employment file." "Strange how?" "His emergency contact," Haewon said, opening the folder and sliding it across the desk. "It's not his wife." Sungmo frowned. "Who is it then?" Haewon hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sungmo felt the floor of his understanding shift slightly beneath him. "His sister," she said. "In Daegu." "Sir, according to this file, Bayo listed himself as single when he was hired 3 years ago." Sungmo stared at the folder without touching it. "Single?" he repeated slowly. "Yes, sir, then who?" Sungmo said, very quietly. "Is Ndidi?" Haewon didn't have an answer for that, and for the first time in the 11 years she'd worked for him, Sungmo watched her hesitate before speaking again. "There's more," she said carefully. "I cross-checked the address on file, the one Bayo uses for his monthly housing allowance. It matches a woman's name on the lease. Ndidi Chidozie Okafor. Widow. 3 dependents." She paused. "Sir, the lease has been in her name alone for 2 years. Bayo's name isn't on it. It never has been." Sungmo sat back slowly in his chair. "Widow," he repeated. "Her husband died 2 years ago, sir. Construction accident, according to the public record. Owusu Bayo isn't her husband." Haewon closed the folder gently, like it might be fragile. "I don't know who he is to her. But he isn't that." The room went very quiet. Sungmo thought about the voice on the phone. "Come home safe. The rice is getting cold. I trust you, Bayo. Whatever's going on." Every soft, ordinary sentence rebuilding itself now into something far stranger and sadder than he'd imagined. A widow, alone, raising 3 children. Talking every night to a man who wasn't her husband and, apparently, wasn't fully honest with her about who he actually was. "Bring him in," Sungmo said. "Quietly, my office." Now, 20 minutes later, Owusu Bayo stood in front of Sungmo's desk, cap in his hands, the picture of a nervous man who had absolutely no idea why he'd been summoned, and every reason to assume it was bad. "Sir, if this is about being late last week, I promise. Sit down, Bayo." Bayo sat. Slowly, like the chair might be a trap. Sungmo studied him for a long moment, really studied him. In a way he realized, with some discomfort, he had never done in 3 years of being driven around by this man. Bayo was maybe 40, tired around the eyes in a way that Sungmo now recognized, because he'd started seeing that same tiredness reflected back at him in mirrors lately, for entirely different reasons. "Tell me about Ndidi," Sungmo said. Every ounce of color left Bayo's face. "Sir, I'm not angry," Sungmo said, which was mostly true. "I just need to understand. Your file says single, no wife, no children. But there's a woman using your emergency contact line who thinks you're her husband, coming home late every night to rice that keeps going cold. Explain it to me." Now, Bayo's hands tightened around his cap. For a moment, Sungmo thought he might simply refuse, deny everything, dig in, the way frightened men often did. Instead, something in him seemed to collapse quietly, like a wall giving up a fight it had been losing for a long time. "She's my sister-in-law," Bayo said finally, very quietly. "My brother's wife. Was my brother, Imeka's father. He died 2 years ago. Construction site, fell 40 feet, nothing anybody could do." His voice cracked slightly on the word fell. Ndidi had nobody here, no family in Korea, none in Nigeria close enough to help. 3 children. No husband, no income beyond what she made cleaning 2 houses a week, and it wasn't enough, sir, it was never enough. Sungmo said nothing, letting him continue. "I told the company I was married," Bayo said, "when I applied for this job. Because married men get the family health insurance plan automatically, and single men," he stopped, swallowed, "single men have to apply separately. Prove dependence, wait months for approval. I didn't have months. Emeka was born 3 weeks after my brother died. He needed doctors immediately. Ndidi needed insurance immediately. So I lied. I said I was married. I put her name and the children's names under my policy, and I have been quietly sending my whole salary to her ever since, sir. Every month. While telling her I'm working late because if she knew how it actually worked, she'd feel like charity, Sungmo finished quietly. Bio looked up. Surprised Sungmo understood that part without being told. She's a proud woman, sir, Bio said. She would rather struggle alone than feel like someone's burden. So I let her believe her husband is still working, still providing, still coming home late some nights because he loves his job too much to leave on time. It's easier for her to be angry at a tired husband than to know the truth, that he's gone, and the man paying her bills isn't her husband at all, just his brother, doing what family does. Sungmo sat with that for a long moment, the weight of it settling somewhere deep and uncomfortable in his chest. Does she know, he asked slowly, that you don't come home most nights? That the man on the other end of her phone calls, he stopped himself right at the edge of the confession he wasn't ready to make yet. Bio frowned slightly, not understanding the question. Sir? Sungmo shook his head, filing that particular disaster away for later. Nothing, continue. Does she know you're not actually her husband? That this whole arrangement is? No, Bio said. And something in his voice went sharp with fear for the first time. No, sir. Please. If she finds out I've been letting her believe, if the company finds out I lied on my employment file, his hands were shaking now, around the cap. I'll lose the insurance. She'll lose the insurance. The children? Bio? Please, sir. I'm begging you. Whatever this costs me, don't let it cost them the insurance. I'll take any punishment. I'll resign quietly. I'll pay back whatever the company thinks I owe. Just don't take that away from her. She doesn't even know how close she is to losing everything. She thinks her husband is just tired and distant. She doesn't know he's been dead for 2 years. She doesn't know any of it. Sungmo held up a hand, and Bio stopped talking instantly, breathing hard, waiting for the axe to fall. Sungmo looked at him for a long time. Then he said the sentence that would, over the following weeks, complicate his life more than any hostile takeover or federal investigation ever had. I need to tell you something, Sungmo said slowly, and when I do, you're going to want to quit on the spot. Bio's face went pale. Sir? Sungmo leaned back in his chair, weighing the words, aware there was no version of this conversation that ended cleanly. 3 nights ago, he said, I meant to call you. About being late. I dialed the wrong number. He paused. I got your emergency contact instead. Indeed, the silence that followed was long enough that Sungmo could hear the air conditioning hum. You spoke to her, Bio said slowly, like the words hurt coming out. I did. Did you tell her no? Sungmo said quickly. She thought I was you. I let her think that. For 11 minutes. He rubbed a hand over his face. And then I called again. 3 nights later. On purpose that time. Bio stood up so fast, the chair scraped hard against the floor. Sir, with respect, you called my brother's widow, pretending to be me? Twice? When you say it like that, it sounds worse. It is worse. It's exactly that bad, sir. That's not a worse way of saying it. That's the true way of saying it. Bio was pacing now, hands pressed to his temples. Something between panic and disbelief cracking through his usual careful composure. Do you understand what she'll think if she finds out? She'll think I let a stranger, my boss, pretend to be her dead husband's brother, pretending to be her husband. Sir, I can't even finish that sentence. It doesn't have an ending that makes sense. I know. She trusts him. She trusts me, as him, because I've protected that trust for 2 years. And you've been what? Chatting with her? About what? Sungmo hesitated, which was answer enough. Bio stopped pacing. What did you talk about, sir? Her day, Sungmo said quietly. The children. A baby who apparently now throws forks as well as spoons, which she called a war crime. A dog that doesn't exist, that your niece named after a cartoon dog that died in some movie. Cold rice. Something shifted in Bio's face, not less alarmed, but differently alarmed. like he'd just realized the ground under this whole conversation was stranger than he'd first understood. You remember all that, Bio said slowly. From 2 phone calls. Yes, sir. Bio sat back down, slower this time, studying Sungmo with new eyes. Why? Sungmo didn't answer right away, and in the silence he found himself facing a question he hadn't let himself ask directly until this exact moment. Because, he said finally, nobody has spoken to me like that in years. Like I was just a tired man who forgot to come home on time. Not a name people whisper about in boardrooms. Not a shadow with a bank account. Which is an actual thing a journalist called me once, by the way. And which I have never told anyone bothered me until right now. He exhaled. She talked to me like I mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with what I own or who I frighten. I haven't felt that in longer than I can remember, Bio. And I know exactly how insane that sounds, coming from the man who signs your paycheck. Bio stared at him for a long moment, some of the panic draining slowly out of his shoulders, replaced by something more careful. Sir, with the deepest respect, he said slowly, you cannot keep doing this. I know. She is grieving a husband she doesn't even know is dead. She is raising 3 children completely alone and doesn't know it. She is holding herself together by believing a story I built to protect her insurance and her pride. And now, you're becoming a character inside that story, sir. Do you understand how much worse this gets the longer it continues? I know. Bio then stopped. Sungmo looked down at his desk, at nothing in particular, turning the truth of it over. He knew Bio was right. He knew every additional phone call built the lie higher, made the eventual fall more devastating. He knew that somewhere in Mapo or Guro or wherever that apartment was, a woman was falling, slowly, unknowingly, for a version of comfort that belonged to nobody real. And yet, I want to help her, Sungmo said. Properly, not as Bio. As myself. Bio went very still. Sir, if you show up as yourself, she'll want to know why the CEO of the company her brother-in-law drives for suddenly knows her name, her children's names, the fact that her fork-throwing baby is named Emika. She'll put it together in about 4 seconds. She's not a foolish woman. Then I'll tell her the truth. All of it. The wrong number, the calls, everything. She will never forgive that. Bio said flatly. Sir, forgive me, but you don't understand grief the way I've watched her carry it. She built a whole story to survive. Her husband laid at work, not dead in the ground. If you take that away from her clumsily, you don't just lose her trust. You break something in her that took 2 years to hold together. Sungmo sat with that, the truth of it landing hard. Then how, he said slowly, do I fix this without breaking her? Bio didn't answer right away. He looked at Sungmo for a long moment, really looked, the way an employee rarely allows himself to look at the man who controls his salary. And something like reluctant understanding passed over his face. You don't fix it in one conversation, Bio said finally. You fix it slowly. Carefully, if you're serious about this, sir, and I mean genuinely serious, not a rich man's passing curiosity, then there's only one way that doesn't end in disaster. Tell me. Bio hesitated 1 more second. Like a man about to hand over something he could never take back. You let her meet you, he said, as yourself. No mention of the calls. No mention of me. A completely new beginning, sir, built on the truth this time, not on a mistake. He paused. And then, when the time is right, and only when the time is right, you tell her everything. The wrong number, the calls, my lie, all of it. At once. Not in pieces. Sungmo nodded slowly, already turning the plan over, already feeling the enormous, terrifying weight of everything that could go wrong with it. And if she finds out before I'm ready to tell her? He asked quietly. Bio's face turned grim. Then God help all 3 of us, sir. Because a woman who has survived what she's survived does not forgive being lied to twice. Neither of them noticed, in that moment, that Sungmo's phone had lit up on the desk between them, a text message arriving, unread. the screen glowing faintly with a name that made the whole careful plan collapse before it had even started. Indeedy? Bio? Who is this new number that just texted Emeka's pediatrician asking about his checkup? Did you do that? Please tell me you did that. Sungmo and Bio both stared at the phone like it had grown teeth. Sir? Bio said slowly, what did you do? I may have looked up the boy's pediatrician, Sungmo said, and asked, in a moment of what I now understand was very poor judgment, whether Emeka's checkups were up to date. Why? Because you said he throws forks now. I got concerned about his fine motor development. I read an article. Bio put his head in his hands. You read an article. At 2 a.m, yes sir, you run a company that moves 11 billion won of cargo a year through 6 ports, and you spent your 2 a.m. reading a parenting article about a baby you have never met, who belongs to a woman who thinks you are someone else entirely. When you list it like that, there is no other way to list it. The phone buzzed again. Ndidi Bio. Answer me. This is weird even for you. Sungmo's stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with shipping contracts or hostile boardrooms. I have to answer, he said. You do not have to answer, Bio said, gripping the edge of the desk like he might physically stop him. This is exactly the disaster I just described to you 4 minutes ago. If I don't answer, she'll worry. If she worries enough, she calls the pediatrician's office directly, and then this unravels in a hospital waiting room instead of somewhere I can control it. Bio opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That is, unfortunately, a fair point. Sungmo picked up the phone. His thumbs hovered over the screen for a long moment, the whole absurd, dangerous, tender mess of the last week compressed into the 11 seconds it took him to type a reply. Sungmo, sorry. Was worried about him, wanted to make sure he's okay. Indeedy. You could have just asked Emmy. Bio. I'm his mother. I know if he's okay. Sungmo, you're right. I'm sorry. There was a pause, long enough that Sungmo actually held his breath, which he found faintly ridiculous. Given that he'd once negotiated a shipping contract while a man across the table quietly rested a hand on a concealed weapon, and Sungmo hadn't so much as blinked. Indeedy. Are you okay? You've been so strange lately. Calling more, texting doctors, laughing at my jokes like you actually think they're funny. Sungmo, I do think they're funny. Indeedy, you've never thought my jokes were funny. Last month you told me the peace story wasn't objectively humorous. Sungmo looked up at Bio. Did you actually say that to her? About the peas? Bio, despite the crisis, looked briefly and genuinely offended. It was a fair critique. The joke needed tightening. Your brother's widow is raising 3 children alone, and you're workshopping her material. She's very funny when she's not trying, sir. That's all I meant. Sungmo's phone buzzed again, cutting off the argument before it could develop further. Ndidi? Bio. Seriously, is something wrong? You're scaring me a little. Sungmo stared at that message for a long time. You're scaring me a little. Somewhere underneath the humor of the last 5 minutes. Something in his chest went cold and serious, because he understood, suddenly and completely, that he was not just risking his own comfort in this. He was standing dangerously close to frightening a woman who had already survived losing everything once. He typed slowly, carefully, choosing each word. Sungmo, nothing's wrong. I promise. I've just been thinking a lot lately about how much I have to be grateful for. You, the kids. I don't say it enough. The reply took longer to come this time. Indeedy. Okay, now I know something's wrong. You don't talk like this. Did you get bad news at work? Bio, please. Just tell me. Sungmo set the phone down slowly on the desk, staring at it like it might detonate. She thinks something's wrong, he said quietly. Something is wrong, sir, Bio said. Multiple things are wrong. I would say we are approximately 4 things deep into wrong at this exact moment. I need to see her, Sungmo said suddenly, standing up. In person. As myself. Today, sir, not to tell her everything, Sungmo said quickly, cutting off the objection he could see building on Bio's face. Just to meet her. Properly, as the man whose driver you are, a reasonable, ordinary reason for me to be near her at all. I need to see her face when she's not performing tiredness into a phone. I need to know if this is real bio before I let it get any bigger than it already is. Bio studied him for a long, careful moment. The particular look of a man deciding whether his boss had lost his mind or found something none of them had words for yet. There's a school event this Saturday, Bio said slowly, reluctantly. Kemi's class. Parents' Day. And Didi always goes alone because I tell her I have to work. He paused. I was going to skip it too, sir. Same excuse, different week. Then I'll go, Sungmo said. As your boss, checking in on my driver's family. Out of corporate goodwill. Nothing more. Bio let out a long breath that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan. Sir, forgive me, but corporate goodwill has never once in the 3 years I've worked for you driven you to a children's parents' day. There's a first time for everything. Bio shook his head slowly, already looking like a man watching a car crash unfold in extremely slow motion. If this goes wrong, sir, I know. I mean truly wrong. Not funny wrong, like the pediatrician text. Actually, devastatingly wrong. Sungmo looked at his phone one more time, at Ndidi's last message still glowing on the screen, please, just tell me, and felt the full, terrifying weight of exactly how much he had already put in motion, and exactly how little of it he could take back now. I know, he said again, quieter this time. But I'm going anyway. Saturday arrived faster than Sungmo wanted, and slower than he could stand. He stood outside Kemi's elementary school in a gray sweater he'd bought specifically because it looked less like something a shadow with a bank account would wear, feeling more nervous than he had during any hostile takeover of his career. You look like a man about to be sentenced, Bio muttered beside him, adjusting his own collar. I feel like one. For what it's worth, sir, you also look like you're trying too hard to look like you're not trying hard, which is somehow more obvious than just trying hard. Thank you, Bio. Extremely helpful. They walked in together, Sungmo trailing half a step behind, telling himself this was reasonable, ordinary, explainable, a boss supporting his driver's family, nothing more. The gymnasium was full of parents in folding chairs, handmade banners on the walls, small children performing songs with the confident chaos of people who had rehearsed exactly twice. Then, he saw her. Ndidi sat near the front, clapping for a girl on stage who could only be Kemi. Same stubborn chin, same quick, bright eyes, even from a distance. Ndidi looked tired in exactly the way Sungmo had imagined from her voice, but nothing had prepared him for how alive she looked underneath the tiredness. Laughing at something the woman beside her said, wiping something off Emika's face without even looking down, like her hands simply knew where her children were at all times. Bio touched his arm lightly. A warning. Sir, breathe. I am breathing. You are doing the thing where you go very still and count people as threats. Stop doing that. This is a kindergarten, not a hostile boardroom. Sungmo forced his shoulders down. They found seats near the back. Kemi finished her song, something about a turtle who learned to share, delivered with the fierce seriousness only a 7-year-old could bring to turtle-based diplomacy. And the room applauded. Ndidi turned in her seat to say something to Emika, and that was when she saw Bio. Her whole face lit up. You came. She mouthed across the gym, delighted, surprised, already half standing to wave him over. Then she saw the man beside him. Sungmo watched her expression shift in real time, recognition, confusion, and then a fast, sharp calculation as she clearly worked out exactly who was standing next to her brother-in-law in a school gymnasium on a Saturday morning. That's your boss, she said when they reached her, not a question. Baek Sungmo, Sungmo said, extending a hand, praying his voice sounded steadier than he felt. You must be Ndidi. Bio talks about you and the children constantly. It wasn't technically a lie. Just not in the way she'd assume. Ndidi shook his hand, polite but visibly bewildered. He's never once mentioned bringing his boss to a school event. I insisted, Sungmo said. Bio's been an exceptional employee. I wanted to see the family he works so hard for. He felt Bio go rigid beside him at the word works, clearly bracing for the whole fragile structure to collapse right there in the gymnasium, between a banner about sharing and a table of juice boxes. It didn't collapse. Not yet. Ndidi studied Sungmo for a moment longer than was comfortable, something flickering behind her eyes that he couldn't quite name. You seem familiar, she said slowly. Have we met before? Sungmo's heart nearly stopped. I don't believe so. Your voice, she said, frowning slightly, like she was chasing something just out of reach. It's strange. You sound like... People tell me I have one of those voices, Sungmo said quickly, too quickly, and beside him Bio made a small strangled sound that he covered with a cough. Ndidi let it go, distracted by Emeka tugging her sleeve, demanding juice with the total confidence of a toddler who had never once been told no about juice. The moment passed. But Sungmo saw, in the half-second before she turned away, that some small suspicious thread had caught in her mind and would not fully let go. He spent the next hour watching her in a way he hadn't let himself do on the phone. The way she crouched down to Kemi's exact eye level to hear about the turtle song in full, dramatic detail. The way she caught Emeka mid-fall without appearing to look. The way she laughed, really laughed, at something Dara whispered to her, head tipped back, completely unguarded. It was, he realized, exactly the woman he'd fallen for on the phone. Except now she had a face, and hands, and a way of tucking her hair back when she was thinking, and none of it made the guilt sitting in his chest any lighter. Near the end of the event, while Bio was occupied helping Kemi carry a papier-mâché turtle to the car, Sungmo found himself alone with Ndidi for the first time. Thank you for coming, she said. It means a lot to Bio, even if he'd never say it. He works too hard. Comes home too late. I worry about him. Sungmo looked at her, really looked, the way he'd promised himself he would, and made a decision that he knew, even as he made it, would either save everything or destroy it completely. Ndidi, he said quietly, can I ask you something strange? She tilted her head, curious. That depends how strange. If someone had been lying to you, he said carefully, not to hurt you, but to protect you from something unbearable, would you want to know the truth, even if it broke your heart? Or would you rather keep the version that let you keep going? Ndidi's expression changed slowly, the warmth in it giving way to something more careful, more alert. That's a very specific kind of strange question, Mr. Bayek, I know. She studied him for a long moment, and Sungmo watched, helpless, as every piece, the voice, the wrong questions, the pediatrician text, the sudden appearance at a school event a boss had no real reason to attend, finally began sliding into place behind her eyes. Her hand went slowly to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. It was you. The phone calls. Oh my God. Ndidi, you're the one who's been calling me, she said, voice shaking now, stepping back from him like the ground had shifted under her feet. Pretending to be for how long? Weeks? You let me talk about my children, about my husband, about... Please, Sungmo said. Let me explain. Explain what? Her voice cracked, sharp and raw, loud enough that a few nearby parents glanced over. That the richest man in this city thought it was funny to pretend to be my husband on the phone? That you sat there and listened to me talk about him like he was? She stopped. Something in her face changed. Fast. The anger folding suddenly into confusion, and Sungmo realized, with dawning horror, exactly what question was about to leave her mouth. Wait. Ndidi said slowly, staring at him. If you were pretending to be Bio, then who has actually been coming home to me every night for 2 years? Bio, returning at exactly that moment with a papier-mâché turtle in his hands and Kemi's small hand in his, stopped dead in the gymnasium doorway, and understood, from the look on both their faces, that the truth, the whole truth, the one he'd protected for 2 years, had just run out of road. Ndidi, Bio said quietly, setting the turtle down slowly, I think we need to talk. All 3 of us, somewhere private. They talked for 2 hours that night, in Ndidi's small living room, long after the children were asleep. Bio told her everything. The accident, the insurance, the lie built out of love and desperation. 2 years of protecting her from a truth he didn't know how to hand her gently. Sungmo told her about the wrong number, the calls he shouldn't have kept making, the strange, undeserved warmth he'd stolen from a life that wasn't his. Ndidi did not forgive either of them quickly. She sat in silence for long stretches, tears she refused to fully let fall, grief for a husband she now had to mourn twice, once when he died, and once again now, hearing it confirmed out loud after 2 years of unknowingly speaking his name into a phone that was never really his. But she did not throw them out either. "I need time," she said finally, near midnight, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Both of you lied to me. For different reasons. I understand the reasons. That doesn't mean I'm not furious. Take whatever time you need," Sungmo said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. Not to fix what I did, I don't think it can be fixed. Not really. Just because I'd like the chance to actually know you. As myself. This time. No pretending." And Didi looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her tired eyes. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. "If you're still here." He was. 6 months later, the insurance issue was resolved properly, legally, permanently. Sungmo had seen to that personally, quietly, without letting it feel like charity. Bio still drove for the company, though now everyone knew exactly who Emeka's father had been. And the company had, at Sungmo's insistence, created a proper family bereavement fund so no other employee would ever have to build a 2-year lie just to keep his family insured. And some evenings, when Sungmo finally left the office late, he didn't call a car. He drove himself, slowly, through the city, to a small apartment where a woman named Ndidi was teaching her daughter that the correct number of P's for a final offer was actually 4, not 3. And a baby named Emeka had recently upgraded from throwing forks to throwing an entire bowl, which everyone agreed was, at minimum, ambitious. He was not Bio. He never had been. But some nights, sitting at that small kitchen table with cold rice reheated twice because he really had been late, Sungmo thought that maybe, for the first time in his entire complicated, powerful, lonely life, he had finally found somewhere worth coming home to. If this story made you laugh, hit subscribe for more stories about powerful men who accidentally find real love in the most ridiculous ways possible. Drop a comment. Would you forgive the wrong number, boss? See you in the next one.